Hello, this is Mark from Productive Computing and Productive Computing University. Thanks for joining us on this video. We are talking about AI text manipulation, that is, manipulating text via FileMaker using artificial intelligence. In this particular demo, we'll be exploring several things. We'll be looking at text summarization, text professionalism. In other words, we take text that is from, let's say, a technician, that is sort of chicken scratch, really messed up text, not grammatically correct, and we make that professional. We also take a brief look at other options that you have with text manipulation, and we'll also dive into translating that text into other languages. So we'll be using FileMaker 2025 or above to accomplish this. We'll use the script step generate response from model. It will require an open API key if you want to test this firsthand, but I have a demo here. All you need to do is put in your API key, click the button, and you'll see the demonstration unfold. It's really simple. I'll also take most of the time in this video to explain how the script steps work under the hood so you can see exactly how to construct it. Essentially, they all use the same script step. In fact, they all use the same script. We just change the script parameter, and one button does either this function or that function or translate or any of those other things. So it's really, really simple. This is a perfect way to get started with AI if you haven't yet done so. You can find this downloadable file, which is completely free and unlocked for your use, at Productive Computing University in a course called FileMaker Features and Free Resources. Okay, let's dig into this demo and let's take a closer look. So after you download and unzip the file, you should see something called AI Text Manipulation. That's what I've named this file as of this recording. Open that up and you'll see two fields, one for prompt, which is your request, and another one for response, which is the response or the results of that prompt after it's been run through OpenAI, in this case. Then we have several buttons here at the bottom: Professionalize, Summarize, Translate to German, Spanish, or a custom request. Each one of these buttons is tied to a script, the same script, in fact, and we're just distinguishing the functionality of these buttons by way of the script parameter that we set at the button level. In fact, this is a button bar, so if I double-click this here, you'll see that it generates the text, or it performs the script called generate text. And this script parameter here is a short prompt that says professionalize and remove any text that would not be completely appropriate for a customer to see. So the script takes a hold of that prompt and follows the instructions. Let me quickly demonstrate this, and then I'll go under the hood and continue our exploration of how this works. So before we get started, make sure you put your OpenAI API key for this. You can click here, and you can just paste your API key here, and then the script will find that and execute. All right, so let me just show you the prompts here. I have 1, 2, and 3 pre-baked prompts with the assumption that this is a technician in one or another professions, and they haven't made the time to properly enter a note. They're sort of doing it on the fly. Maybe they're using a mobile device. So the capitalization, the punctuation, the grammar, the spelling may all be all over the place. Even their thought patterns or their chain of thought might be a little scattered. So the idea is that this would be a typical person in a hurry, entering a note in, let's say, a mobile device, and that note now needs to be made professional. So I'll click 1 and we'll get this first option. This is, let's say the technician is an HVAC installer, and this is what they've done. So we can take this loose and somewhat informal way to approach this and click professionalize, and it'll take that comment, keep the context intact, but just make it professional. Here's another example where we can take this and summarize it. So this will be more of a bullet point summarization of what was done if you wanted it to be described in that way. So two handy functions here already, and now I'd like to show you under the hood how these work. So I'll go to Scripts, Script Workspace, and the name of the script is called Generate Text. So that's what does the magic here. Before we get into this, let's look at some setup scripts. We have the Insert Prompt script. This is where we distinguish button 1, button 2, and button 3. And you can see I made one to be a comment of HVAC, the other one is an electrician, and then a plumber. And I've just used AI to come up with a random, loosely worded text example for each of those professions. So we'd have something to work with. This script step is important where we need to configure the account or tell FileMaker how we want to work with the account. So when we select this step, we have to choose the name of it. The name of this is just so we can reference this configuration from other script steps that we might call later on. The name is anything that you want it to be. You could put a 1 here. You could put your name. In my case, I like to put the actual name of the provider as the name of this configuration so that I know, oh, I'm using OpenAI, so I need to go configure for that. And then I will have the option to configure here for OpenAI, Anthropic, and Co. here, and more coming soon. And then over here, we have the API key itself. So for this, I've targeted just the API key field that's actually in the demo file. So very easy to do that. You could also reference this API key using a custom function if you wanted to completely hide where that API key is coming from. But one good way to do that is using a custom function because they can be both hidden and protected. But for now, I've put it just as a field that you can see under this tool here. When you click Open API Key, that's where you put your Open API Key. And you'll need that in order for this demo to run. So now back to the script that does all the heavy lifting. We have some traditional script steps here: allow user abort on, set error capture on. Normally I would do this, allow user abort off. In fact, I'll do that now and we'll deliver it this way. But I keep it on during debugging so that if I have to exit a loop or something like that, it's easier to do that without having to force quit FileMaker. This right here is simply validating if the user has their API key entered. If not, we prompt them for that. And then we go and actually perform the script configure AI account, which was this other one we already looked at. So you need to perform configure AI account at least once per FileMaker session. You don't have to do it before every script is called, but you have to do it at least once for any one time that you use those AI script steps. Once it's configured until you quit FileMaker. But in my case here, just to make sure that this demo works each and every time, I call it here on step 11 to configure the account so that we have it. So it doesn't matter if you call it more than once or multiple times or at the beginning of every script. That really doesn't matter, but you have to call it at least once. So that's what I'm doing here. So steps 13 through 18 is really just about the button over here, this special button, this custom button here. This is provides for special functionality or custom functionality. In fact, I should call that check for custom functionality under any given button based on the script parameter. So if that is full, if there is a script parameter under those buttons, then it will populate the prompt with the script parameter. So in other words, my script parameters, if we take a look here under the hood, I double click this button bar, you'll see that I do call the script called generate text, but then each one of these buttons has a script parameter where I give it specific instructions. In the case of summarization, I say summarize as bullets and adjust any text to make it more professional and customer facing. So that's my prompt there. Now, incidentally, the custom button has no parameter, and that's what this is doing right here. If there's no parameter, we show a custom dialog, and we essentially say, what would you like to do? And then the user can choose what they want to do. We store that right here in the input field as a prompt, $$ prompt, and then we store that and use it in the instructions later on. If that dialog box appears and the user pushes cancel, then we exit the script. And then finally, the script that does really all the work is the generate response from model script step. It needs to know several things. The first thing it needs to know is what configuration account are you referencing? So I put here OpenAI, but that's the same as how I configured it here, OpenAI. So as long as those match, it knows how to pull the configuration and, most importantly, what provider am I using and what API key am I using. Okay, back to the main script here. So the next thing we need to tell it is the model. And for this, I'm using a little bit of a calculation. So in this calculation, I have a couple of options for the model to use. If the prompt involves the word translate, that's a trigger word for it to use the stronger model or the bigger model known as GPT-5 Mini, which is bigger than GPT-5 Nano. Nano is fine for all the other buttons, but when it comes to translation, sometimes you need to pick a stronger and bigger model for it to properly translate. So that's what I've done here. And we're simply using the pattern count in the prompt. If we see the word translate, that triggers it to use the bigger model. So that's there. Now for the prompt, that's right here. So this prompt is simply pulling the prompt from the field that you saw in the demo, that first field. Then we get to choose the response. That's where we want our value to be stored. Again, a field right on the main file of the demo. That was the second field below. So the request, the response, and then you can click on this gear icon to determine anything else. We are using stream. We do have some parameters and we have some instructions. Let's go over the instructions first. So I've specified more detail here with 3 main points. Do not include any introduction, title, or conclusion text in the response, only return the modified text. Number 2, if you're asked to translate into another language, ensure the translation is accurate before returning the response. Number 3, do not include any prompt instructions in the response. Ensure that you return the result text only. Sort of reiterating what we say in number 1, which is not to include introduction, title, or conclusion. We're kind of calling those out specifically. Here we're saying it again, don't include any instructions in the prompt within your response. And that really brings home the idea that it won't explain itself. In other words, if we say, summarize this text, we don't want to hear, oh, here is your text summarized, and then it gives you the answer. We just want the summarized text. That's really what most of this instruction is all about. Then we say, modify this text as follows, and then we give it the prompt. So that's where we actually pull the text, the technician's note, if you will, goes here. Notice how I am putting a carriage return after each one of these lines so that the model knows what we're talking about and we're kind of spoon feeding it specific instructions. So that goes in the instruction area here. Then stream is on so that the text can stream as the answer is coming back. We don't have to wait all the way to the end before seeing any text. We can start streaming right away. And then parameters I'm using here mostly because we are using GPT-5. And when we use GPT-5, I like to put the reasoning effort to minimal so that we don't have it use a lot of its logic brain power and therefore consume more tokens and take more time, because nothing we're doing here really requires logic brain power that GPT-5 is capable of. So we're essentially saying don't use it at all, or more specifically, minimal, which ends up not using it at all. No tokens should be used for that. Then in that same vein, verbosity, which just says, I want your responses as brief as possible. Don't elaborate. Don't use your imagination. Don't get creative. Just keep it very precise and tight and not verbose. So those parameters are formatted as JSON, and I'm using this function here called JSON set element, and we're putting in 2 options here, 2 keys, if you will, reasoning underscore effort and verbosity. And then we're saying minimal and low. Now you might be saying, well, where do I get all this information? This comes directly from the API documentation from OpenAI when you're working with this model. And you can read about that in the docs. And that's it. Then we commit the records. All right, so let's take a look at some other options here. I'll go to the technician note 2, which happens to be in all caps. And I want to now summarize that in German. So that should use the stronger model. It should make it professional and remove the all caps aspect of that. And then I'll go to the third option here, which is a plumber, and I'll translate to Spanish. There we go. That, again, using the stronger model, or I can click Professionalize, and that'll be using the nano model instead. You'll notice that even it streamed a little quicker between that Professionalized. See how fast it streams versus if I went to translate that to German, you can see it's a little bit slower as it draws. Now, part of that might be the translation, but part of that just could be the native streaming speed that the model is capable of. The bigger the model, typically the slower it streams. All right, but then custom gives the user the option to put in whatever they'd like about this. So you could say, limit this summary to a single sentence. And that should use the stronger model and limit it to a single sentence. Now, it's kind of a run-on sentence because there's a lot to cover here, even for a summary, but it is a single sentence with only one period, and it's probably still a grammatically correct single sentence, but might be a little bit of a run-on or might be accused of being a little too long. So that's essentially it. That's what this file does. It will demonstrate some of the basics. Feel free now to explore on your own. You can change the model out if you'd like, go with a stronger model. Just keep in mind that the bigger the model you go, the more money it costs, although it's not terribly expensive for these small little examples. It should be in the pennies at best. But if you did get elaborate and you wanted to do this against thousands and thousands of records, yeah, you would want to calculate the tokens used and then figure out what that might cost over time. The other thing you can experiment with is putting your own button here and making your own instructions based on that button, so you can get familiar with how all this works. If you'd like, another great thing to try out is just create a brand new file from scratch and then just work with this file. I'll call it test and put it on my desktop. And then make your 3 fields. Make your API key, make your prompt, make your response, and then configure an account script step, and then generate response from model and see if you can tie this in. If you do it without the instructions or any of that stuff, it should be very quick. If you do use GPT-5 and you don't put in that parameter option, it will take longer to process, it will use more tokens, and it's just overkill. So if you are going to use a GPT-5 model or something in that vein, let's say by the time you watch this, we're at GPT-6 or 7, then you might want to also include a parameter that says verbosity low and reasoning effort minimal. Okay, that takes care of this demo. I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to explore on your own, get familiar with these basic connections into FileMaker in the world of AI. Feel free to use this demonstration in front of a customer or a group of users if you want to demonstrate what FileMaker is capable of. If you can see a use case, I think then you would have a good, very easy to understand demo where you just have, this is the original, here's the modified, I click a button and it comes back with the result. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you on the next one. You can find this downloadable file, which is completely free and unlocked for your use, at Productive Computing University in a course called FileMaker Features and Free Resources.